The next form that we'll practice is another curved-sided form, which is the cone. It's really difficult for me to make a curved line this way. It's harder for me than it is to make a curved line this way. So I'm turning my paper, and I'm going to draw the cone here. Start drawing lightly, and I'm going to make a nice, gentle curve. I want to think about where the center of that curve is, and I'm going to make just a slight mark above the center, just straight up vertically. Then from each side of the curve, I'm going to draw a diagonal line to about that mark. And there's the basic outline or contour line of the cone. The shadow of the cone is going to start near the center. I want it to go to the right, just like my two other shadows. And it's going to be pointed. With the cone, we need to think about the dark grays and the light grays moving from the right side of the cone and then the highlight on the left side. I'm going to draw these light guidelines to show you about where those values are. We have our darkest gray, our middle gray, light gray, and then our highlight from the edge to the point. I'm going to turn my paper again, and I'm going to start making some light curved lines. And I want you to notice that I'm curving these about the same curve as I have on the bottom of the cone. These are also guidelines that are going to help me make sure that my hatch marks are curved. This section is going to be my darkest gray, so I'm going to press down a little harder, and I'm going to let those just cross over my light guideline. This area gets thinner and narrower as I go toward the tip or the point of the cone. So I have to really be careful up here to make these short hatch marks. Fill in some of those spaces carefully. Now as I move to the next shaded section, I'm not going to press down as hard. I'm going to start back here on the darker value and then pull hatch marks. I think I got just a little heavy there. Pull the hatch marks toward my lightest gray area. Still making sure I'm curving my pencil with that curve at the bottom of the cone. I'm going to make this area just a touch darker. We should be able to see a difference between this value and this second value. The last bit of shading that I'm going to do is really just using very, very light lines. I'm going to go ahead and gently erase this guideline. And I'm going to let those cross over toward this highlighted edge of the cone. Remember, with curved-sided forms, we want to curve our hatch marks. So here we see dark gray, our middle gray, very light gray value, and then our highlight. The shadow is the same as the other two. That'll be our darkest. And these are just the basic rules of getting started with shading to create the illusion of the object being three-dimensional. Finally, I'd like to show you how to shade a cylinder. I could do some overlapping by putting the cylinder behind the cube, but I think I'm going to do it out front. I'd like to turn my paper to make that the curve of the bottom of the cylinder, and that's a similar curve to what I've made for the cone. You can see that those are similar. I want to create 2 vertical lines. This is going to be a short cylinder because I don't want to get into that shadow. The curve at the top of the cylinder needs to be parallel to the curve at the bottom of the cylinder. So I want to carefully make these 2 curves the same. At the top of my cylinder, I don't want to make a half circle. This is an ellipse shape, which is similar to the shape of an oval, but it's pointed at the ends. The shadow will start about in the middle. It's going the same direction. That one went off the paper. And the end of the shadow will be a curve. And again, the shadow here is partly off the paper. I'm going to draw some very light guidelines. These are vertical. They're not diagonal like we have on the cone. They're vertical. And this will be dark gray, middle gray, lighter gray. The top will be our highlight because it has a flat top. I'm going to start the same way I did with the cone by making some light hatch marks that are following the curve of the top and bottom of the cylinder. Go back to my side of the cylinder that's closest to the shadow, all the way in the shadow, and I'm going over my guideline so that these values will blend together a little. We don't want to use our finger to rub. We want to really focus on using our pencil and hatching to create these values. Have my middle gray now. The lightest gray. The top I'll leave unshaded for the highlight, and again, the shadow, we want to make a nice dark shadow. The final thing that I want to do is to create a horizon line behind the forms, which will separate the ground, what they're sitting on, and the area behind the background or the empty space. So I'd like to turn my paper, and I want to make a horizontal line. I don't want to draw through the forms. I just want to draw across the paper. And once I get that drawn, I can go back and make that a little bit darker. You can see your paper will get kind of smudgy. And that is the basics of using hatching and cross-hatching to shade flat-sided and curved-sided forms, also known as 3-dimensional shapes.